Ooh, look at that. Here we go. Are you ready to talk about
Little late for that.
stuff and things? Alright. Look at that fade. My audio has never worked so well, except I'm like super loud in my own headphones. So let's see here. Athena. Alright. So what do you have to say here?
Well, as I'll try to repeat the thing. I'll repeat it off air as well as as I can. When you talk about intelligent design, okay, fine, I'll give you that. But for this, you need to ask yourself, how intelligent is this entity? This designer. Once once you take a look around you, at the other flaws we find in nature and with the human body, you're gonna be like, okay, well, this designer could be intelligent, but based on that, you're gonna wonder. I used the example of the Q continuum from Star Trek. For they're sorry, they are raised, super advanced beings that exist, that exist in their own reality called the Q continuum, that is beyond comprehension. So there are different cues with, with various personalities, and one must assume various levels of intelligence. You know what I mean? Even if if a Q, if a Q, has the intelligence of their version of a 5 year old, compared to us, they would still be more powerful. So if the universe was created by an intelligent designer, you gotta wonder, was the designer 5? Is that why the universe is so crappy, and humans have all the flaws, or like, you know what I mean? I know I put it better off air, but this is the best you're gonna get.
No, that's totally fine. You're making a bad design argument because, like, for example, the fact that our air passage is so close to our throat, our food passage.
Well, no, no,
Uh,
no, no. It's not close to it. It's the same hole.
yeah, well, there you go. So because this is perceived to be bad design, um, either designer's stupid or something else makes better sense. Um, yeah, sure. I mean, you could think whatever you want about the designer, whatever whoever that is, but
Well, no, no. See, I don't even believe it. I don't even believe in the intelligent design, the intelligent design argument. I'm just giving you an argument one can use. You know what I
mhm,
mean?
yeah. Well, I mean, the simple response is that intelligent design doesn't have anything to really say about that. Um, it doesn't say a
Yeah,
whole
but
lot about the nature of the designer, except that they believe that certain effects are attributable to an intelligent cause.
yeah, but here's the thing. Like, you basically trying to understand something about the painter. But looking at a painting without, like, you know what I mean? It's like, say you're looking at a painting, and in order to understand something about the paint, about the paint, the painting, you need to understand something about the painter. But because you don't understand something about the painter, you can't understand the painting. It's a vicious cycle. You know what I mean? I'm just trying to make you, to make you think about it. Like, I know intelligent design itself, that says nothing about the intelligence of the designer, but that's something to consider. I mean, right, immutable, or am I crazy?
Fair point to consider. I mean, another fair point to consider would be like, would an intelligent design automatically pre-assume that the
Hello? You kind of broke up. If you're gonna repeat that, maybe it's my phone. That's shit.
no, I mean, like, from my perspective, wouldn't it be pre-assumed that the intelligent designer does exist?
Oh yeah, it would. It would. You are presuming that.
How do we know
But
that?
I guess for intelligent designer, for intelligent design proponents, that make an intelligent designer, makes more sense than saying something comes from nothing, which is a misrepresentation of virtual particles.
Well, how do you know that anything exists?
Let's not. Hey, whoa! Let's not go down the solipsism route, please.
No, I mean like.
I mean, we can go down that hole, but that's a very deep.
They exist.
How do I know things exist?
What?
You ask me, how do I know things exist?
Yeah, how do we know that something exists? Or let's make it more interesting. Let's say there's something we know exists, but we haven't directly observed it, though.
Okay, what?
We know that?
Like whether or not I can observe something doesn't.
Yeah, sorry about that. The car just went by. Should be fine now.
I mean, like whether or not something exists is independent of my ability to observe it. Like a crystal dragon may exist in the sky somewhere that I will never be able to see simply because the properties of that dragon does not permit me to see it. I mean, you can do certain things. You could try to shine certain lights on it that may get it to refract, and things like that. I mean, the nature of perception seems to be mostly chemically driven, if not entirely chemically driven.
So then basically what you're saying is that because of what you think might be the case of this thing that might exist, you could look for certain patterns that this thing might produce. So your crystal dragon, if it exists in that way, then you could shine light in a certain way to reflect, and if you're right, then those effects will be apparent. So if you see those effects, then you can infer, oh, this is consistent with that hypothesis.
Well, sure. I mean, I think in the case of an intelligent design argument, though, it's kind of an unnecessary assumption. It's kind of like, okay, why would we assume that there's a designer to begin with? I mean, what about the universe itself is indicative of a designer?
Because you already know about effects of intelligent cause.
Well, sure, but I know they permeate to a finite extent. I don't know necessarily that they permeate.
Hold on. Well, sorry to interrupt you, but what did you mean by that? How do we know, like, give us an example of what we know that caused. I mean, you're saying that because of computer, like, okay, just specify what you mean. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut in. I was that just.
Are you talking to me or?
Yes, you.
Me?
Yes, because if you remember correctly, you said you already know something was caused. I forget the way you put it, but then I was like, well, wait, what is he talking about? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what do you like?
We know that there are certain effects that are associated with intelligent cause.
But hold on, you talked about
if we observe those effects, then intelligent cause is an explanatory resource.
Okay, but here's the paradigm, right? I can look at an effect and I can determine a cause, and I can determine a probable cause, but I can't necessarily do the same thing. I can't necessarily say, like, okay, from this cause, I'm certain to generate this effect. Like, there's certain variables that need to be accounted for, and fundamentally, a certain aspect of randomness has to, I think, will play out. So sure, I mean, it could be that my car has blown a gasket and that's why it's not working. And that could be one account, but, somebody else could have blown a gasket and their car is still working fine, but their car may not be working for an entirely different reason.
Yeah, but I mean, what if the gasket is the only thing that you know of that can cause that?
Well, I mean, then that's based upon my ability. Well, okay. So for me, I mean, I would say that that's the only thing I can determine, but that that doesn't mean that that's the end all be all to it.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that. I wouldn't say that I would ever argue that the thing that I think is the most reasonable conclusion is the end all be all, because there could always be new information.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't even try and say it's the most likely, because I can't necessarily say that, because I'm dealing with a finite set of information. I'm having to judge based upon what I know.
Or anything, we're always dealing with a finite set of information.
Well, yeah, I mean, but there's certain things you can gather from that information that are discrete, or that are discrete enough.
Okay.
I mean, I don't need to be able to see every atom on a tree to tell that it's a tree. Like, there seems to be some fundamental, like, limit to what defines a tree.
Sure.
I mean, like, I could see intelligent design as being a thing. I just don't know why it would be a thing. Like,
So
sure,
you
there
don't
could
know
be.
why we might consider inferring an intelligent cause when we observe effects of an intelligent cause.
Well, I mean,
Effects that.
well, how
But
do you?
so, Chris, what do you mean by that? Like, are you talking about life in general?
Like,
Well, yeah, I think you're asking for specific examples.
Well, yeah, because
well,
like you're confusing me.
Yeah,
like that's
what
part
we've been kind of
convoluted.
sorry, what we've been kind of talking about in the last couple of chats is just at a high level, does the argument even make sense in principle? So I'm just kind of explaining that in principle, we're just saying that if you had certain effects that are uniquely attributable to intelligent cause, and then you observe those effects somewhere, it's reasonable to infer.
Okay, but my question is, what are those effects that you're talking about? Are you talking about life in general, the complexity of life, the human mind? What do you mean? I mean, I'm sorry to sound like to sound mean here, but I'm trying to figure out what you mean. Like, help me see what you see.
DNA behaves like a computer or a digital code.
Whoa! Hold on. Here's the thing. Did you say digital code or DNA code?
Digital code. So, but agree or disagree with the particular effects, whether they meet the criteria of those effects that are produced by intelligent cause. The argument in principle, though, is if we did observe those effects, it's reasonable to infer intelligent cause.
Yeah, but again, my question would be, how intelligent is this cause when there's obviously obvious issues with the design? Like, you know what I mean? Like if you want to talk about DNA, okay, DNA is nifty, but there are issues with it, where it's replicating all the damn time and mistakes happen. You know what I mean? Luckily, the body, has evolved well enough to repair a lot of it, but that damage accumulates over time, and that's why you die. You know what I mean? You die because your body can't. It's like a car. Okay, you know what I mean? A car over time. You know what I mean? A car over time gets accumulates damage. People who have fixed the cars have been able to make them run for 100 years, or longer than they were supposed to. That's the point. You know what I mean? Like I said, I could give you intelligent design, but how intelligent is the designer? Like, you know what I mean? Because intelligence is just this relative at the end of the day. I could say the cat down the street is intelligent, because they found a way, because they could solve the problem to get food. Like, how are you defining intelligence?
There are a couple of problems. You can't really determine a level of intelligence based on what you perceive to be design flaws, because it's not really objective. I mean, design flaw or design success is relative to the goals of the designing intelligence. maybe
Okay,
it's this way because
Well,
that's the way it was done.
that is just some BS right there. But go ahead, Immutable.
I mean, what
But
level of design
well,
is objective? I mean, I haven't seen one yet, but okay. Like what? Like you seem to be carrying this notion that all inferred levels of design are subjective, and that there's one that's objective. I'm kind of wondering what that one is particularly.
I'm not really sure what you mean. I'm just saying that it's not if you're trying to dismiss the argument based on a bad design. I mean, bad is in the eye of the beholder.
I mean, what's calling into question is the intelligence of the being, right? It's the fact that why would an intelligent being choose to create such a sloppy system when there's other alternatives, pretty much an infinite number of them at its disposal?
Well, I mean, there are some things that we call sloppy systems that turn out to not be so sloppy, like the inverted retina. So you can't rule out that there's, in the first place, you can't, in principle, rule out that there is a good reason for it. I mean, to argue that I don't understand why this is a certain way, therefore it's a bad design, or therefore there is no designer, that's, I mean, the definition of an argument from ignorance. I mean,
I
if
don't
the alternative is you're inferring natural
know. So I mean, like the thing I'm saying is I don't understand why we're calling something particularly to be called intelligent under the pretense that an intelligent designer created this thing. I can make sense of why, the same pipe I drink things down and the same pipe I eat things down is horrible. It's a byproduct of evolution. But, I mean, that's explained through phylogeny and other things. But through intelligent design aspect, it's kind of like, okay, pretty much all species have this kind of thing going on. And it seems like it's a pretty big design flaw. I mean,
Well, hold on. Aren't there some animals? I think what whales and dolphins that actually evolution solved that problem. And like I
probably.
remember. Yeah, I remember. There's certain fish or certain animals that don't really have that. That flaw, so to speak. I'm sure they have other flaws. You know what I mean? Because in nature, no, nothing is perfect.
I mean, it does. I mean, you can disagree with the design. It doesn't change the argument. It doesn't change the existence of other effects. I mean, nobody's arguing design from the effects that you're talking about. And so the relevance of these effects that you're bringing up is
Okay, so hold on.
determining whether it
Yeah. Okay, let me.
affects the validity of the inference in the first place, which I don't think it does. If you think it's the design of the digestion system and the our air intake or whatever, if you think that's a bad design, well, it doesn't change the fact that people will infer design from other effects. It has no bearing on that whatsoever.
See. Here's the problem with this argument because if you were to apply that same argument to a human designer, you'd be torn to shreds.
I don't think so.
Immutable, you want to back me up on this?
Say that's really bad design, but because it has other attributes that I know from experience are designed.
Why the hell did I come in here when I was pissed off?
I mean,
like a poorly designed car, I can still tell that it's designed, and I'm not inferring.
Yeah, but one, it was designed by humans, and how well is that car going to keep you safe? That's the point we're making here.
Sure, the designer could make a sloppy product, and if you're trying to say that, look, intelligent design could be an alternative model, an alternative theory to the theory of evolution, the question fundamentally would become, well, why in the hell would somebody accept, this notion of an intelligent design over evolutionary theory, which has a perfectly rational explanation for apparently bad design?
Well, but I'm also skeptical about claims of bad design because there have been other examples where ostensibly bad design has turned out to be actually good design. So,
Okay, which ones? Give me an example.
well, the inverted retina.
How is that a good, like, explain that? Okay, the inverted retina. How is that good design?
Helps us to see better in the dark.
Okay, but
Go ahead and read about that. But
why couldn't that have evolved rather than be created? Like, if the intelligent designer exists, why couldn't he have used evolution, to create everything? Like, you know what I mean? He created the universe, and then 13.8 billion years later, here we are. Like, the evolution doesn't discredit. Oh, God damn it!
And there are some people who say that evolution is partly it's used as a tool. That's part of the process. Even some people in the design community, I believe Mike B would be one of them. I don't know if I really take that view, but I mean, it's just the fact that design proponents do sometimes take that view. I mean, it kind of shows that just because you think evolution can do something, it still doesn't take away from the other arguments.
Well, sure. I mean, the question still remains, though. Why is that argument more convincing, or why is that more preferential to accept than evolutionary theory or any other theory that attempts to explain biodiversity?
Well,
Because, I mean, that's ultimately the question we're dealing with. Is here are two things that are explaining the same phenomenon, and we would like to select one of those preferentially
mhm.
to explain and to predict the behavior and phenomenon that will occur in the future.
Well, the argument would be that evolution doesn't explain certain effects
Okay.
Such as,
we know are a product of an intelligent cause.
okay, such as.
An intelligent design makes inferences. What's your point exactly?
Well, let's see. I wanted to ask what he meant by that. Like, what examples can he give that? God, my memory sucks. But I wanted to have a good example with that of that. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's just like I think you're letting him. You're letting him skate by saying something and not pushing him on it because he says, "Oh, there's evidence for an intelligent designer," but then doesn't really give that evidence or an inference for effects or something. I mean, I'm sorry. Again, I need to apologize for being aggressive here. It's just the way I speak.
That's okay. Do you think that the argument itself is reasonable?
I told you both off air when we started. It is reasonable in the context if you consider an intelligent designer that's an alien or Q.
I guess it would make sense if you're proposing that the kind of entity that exists in this case is something that's natural. Supernatural kind of raises its own issues.
Well, I don't know. That kind of gets into a semantic.
Not really.
Not really. I mean, it has to do with the abilities of the supernatural as opposed to properties that natural beings have. I mean, natural beings can interact with their world.
I mean, I don't. Yeah, we'd have to get into what do you even mean by supernatural or natural, and some people define the natural as everything that exists. And
Would you say that that's a bad definition for natural?
Well, look, hold on. Here's the perfect definition for supernatural that I've read. Okay, so, natural is everything that exists in the observable universe. Supernatural is is what we consider to something to be that is outside our own universe. Now, something that exists outside of your universe may still be natural. For example, if you subscribe to the many world interpretation and the multiverse, those universes will still be natural, but because they are outside of of the observable the observable horizon of the universe, they may as well be supernatural. I'm done.
Okay, so you believe that things exist outside the observable universe?
They may
Did
well.
I say that immutable?
No, I mean, things may well exist outside the observable universe, but we would never know that.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
if you believe by that definition, If you do
Never
believe
said
in,
I believed it. I just gave you a definition of supernatural, and then I said how something, how something can still be natural, but but exist outside our universe. If you subscribe to, the multiverse theory or many worlds interpretation, those systems will
did
follow
I?
natural laws. You know what I mean?
Okay, I'm not sure if I heard your.
God damn it, each universe is its own separate bubble. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I'm not sure if I heard your definition of supernatural. Right? Did you say in your definition it's whatever exists outside the observable universe?
Yes, but then I added this caveat saying that just because something exists outside the observable universe does not mean it's not natural. I used the example of the multiverse, of the multiverse theory, where it posits that all alternate universes exists alongside us. Now, if you subscribe to that, you know what I mean. Those universes exist naturally, but they exist isolated from each other. Do I need to repeat?
I mean, it sounds like you're saying the supernatural is that which exists outside the observable universe, with the caveat that those things are natural.
Yeah, those things consist of other things that are, exist in our own universe or within our own.
We consider them supernatural now, but just because that's only because we can't see beyond the observable universe.
So
You know what I
supernatural
mean?
is relative; it's not absolute.
I would define it differently, but in that case, yes.
So relative to some other universe within the multiverse, we are supernatural.
No, oh my God.
Not really. I mean, we possess abilities that can be quantized. Supernatural seems to be the case that its abilities are practically limitless, that it has no cap, so to speak, on what it can do.
I don't know. I don't operate under that assumption. I don't think.
It's not really an assumption. It's just the way things are. Like immutable, and I obviously are not, not degree holding physicist. Well, I'm not. He's going to school for whatever the hell. But it's like I would think he and I understand a little, what little physics we do fairly well. Like, I'm not trying to sound arrogant here. There's a lot still learn, but from what I've learned, you know what I mean? I mean, I don't know. Maybe Immutable disagrees with me, and and he thinks, oh, you don't know what the hell you're talking about.
I just I'm. I mean, I'm comfortable saying a designer might be natural or might be supernatural. I think we can work within those frameworks.
Yeah, but do you understand why we can't say that?
Well, I mean, I assume that you probably operate under a naturalistic view of science, is what I'm guessing.
I
So
mean,
you would be uncomfortable with words like supernatural.
that's kind of the assumption of science, isn't it? The pretense of philosophical naturalism.
I don't really think so.
What supernatural prediction has science made that's come to pass?
I still don't think that we have a definition of supernatural, so I think the question is kind of incoherent.
I just told you.
Okay.
I
Wow.
challenged the definition. I didn't get a response.
Okay, so I'll give you a definition.
It's like, go ahead, Immutable. I'm gonna mute.
Things which are supernatural transcend properties of beings that are natural.
Okay, so what is natural then?
Things which can be quantized and observed within our local universe.
Okay. So let's say we have a dark spot in the universe, and our best theories, our best models say that's because some other universe bumped up against our universe.
Hold on.
So
That's
natural, but
that's one of the theories. I know that there is this like giant section. Well, okay, this big section of the universe that's completely black. What the hell? It's completely black. You know what I mean? There are no galaxies there. I think Immutable knows what I'm talking about. I just don't remember the name. There's many theories, or many theories about why that spot is there. One of them, is is that maybe a parallel universe bumped with ours. But of course, since there's no way for us to know whether that's the case, it just gets scrapped until we can come up with something better. But I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, but as you're saying, Brandon.
Well, say that again. Sorry.
As you're saying,
I was just saying. So, so the evidence manifests. We can observe it, but it's an effect of something that we can't observe, we can't quantize or whatever. So, by your definition, would that be evidence of something supernatural?
No, because I still wouldn't know what the supernatural is. I wouldn't know particular aspects of it by which I could quantify it by. Because the supernatural is telling me what it isn't, not what it is.
The supernatural is telling you what it isn't. Can you unpack that?
So, something supernatural is something that transcends the natural. It's something that isn't natural. It's something that goes beyond it. But that's still unclear as to what precisely that means. Like, that's hard logically to comprehend as to exactly, okay, something may be omnipotent, something may be omnipresent, but what exactly does that mean? How would I notice that? Like, how would I point to a being and say, yeah, that's omnipresent, or that's omnipotent, or something like that? Basically, how would I be able to tell that the properties associated to something supernatural are indeed supernatural?
Well, you could have a machine that let's see here. Let's say this supernatural all-knowing being is a computer, and you can plug into it, and you have a super computer of your own. It's not conscious, but it can detect everything that's going on in this all-knowing being that you're able to plug into, and it can tell you that it is aware of every fundamental particle that exists.
Okay.
Okay, so then you just
But
I mean, that would tell me that that machine has a very keen sense of perception towards things. It's extremely sensitive towards measurements.
I mean, but not
Yeah,
even
sure. Take a deterministic view, and I think you can derive omniscience.
Well, wouldn't you say that even in the case of an omniscient being, there's some things it couldn't know? Because some things that it could know would be logically incoherent.
Yep, probably you might be, but even if you determine that, then you've still tested the measured or quantified or whatever the idea, though.
I mean, but there's also a very simple way to show why something cannot be omnipotent. And the way of showing that is to consider the question, what if an omnipotent being doesn't know that it doesn't know something?
Well, then they're not Socrates. Sorry, I had to put that joke in.
Yeah, did you
Can
get the
it
question?
know that it doesn't know something? Yeah, but isn't that kind of a red herring, though?
Not really. I
Because
mean,
you assume, but I guess that would be okay. So that would be a test of the test, though. Like, can you know that your computer verifies that it has knowledge of all the fundamental particles that exist?
yeah, I mean, the
Okay.
computer might know that, but could you know that?
Right. Okay.
Like, how would the computer communicate that to you?
And I don't know, like, I had a problem with him saying there's a supernatural computer that you can connect to, I just thought of I just thought of like the Matrix thing simulation, but like I don't know, just I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but that just seems like he was making a simulation argument which in that case, the world that's running the simulation would be natural. It would still be made. It would still follow the four laws of physics. I mean, it would be supernatural. Technically, it would be supernatural to the beings in the simulation because it's outside their simulation. But
Yeah,
you
but
know
that's
what?
what I
I'm
was
gonna
saying
shut up.
earlier, that there's another definition that supernatural is relative. So, like,
It's always space and time. What's the point?
Like, isn't
the
it?
point is that it's not an absolute attribute of a thing. It's only relative. It only describes a relative position of something. So,
Well,
like,
I mean, but
me
that's
inside the matrix, it's not supernatural for me. It's just natural.
But that's the point I was making. Because when I say a supernatural computer, how the hell can a computer be supernatural?
so. I would say, like, I would argue that if you knew that you were inside a matrix, like, if you could somehow determine that, you would be supernatural.
Why? Don't you have to have knowledge? The knowledge that you're saying is you can't have of the supernatural in order to know in that case?
No, because
I like the word games.
because I would view it as being the case as you would have to know something that lies beyond like the programming, the parameters of the matrix that's defined in order to know that particular thing. But then, of course, you trigger the question: well, what if the matrix is embedded in another matrix? And that
There you go. There you go.
But I mean, okay, so but your argument is that the supernatural is just something that you can't really figure it out. You can't quantify it or anything.
Well, not yet.
it seems
Well, that's that's an argument to the contrary, I guess. But
How? I'm just saying, we can't. You know what? Whatever. Bye. I'm staying in, but
um, but yeah, I was gonna bring up the point about proving a negative. Like, make a negative statement that you can't prove. Does that make that statement supernatural? And what if we discover whatever the thing is that we can't disprove? Does it suddenly become natural just because we?
and I would say
Is the
things
fact that we? Is it really the fact that we can't? I don't know.
and I'd say something is like something that's supernatural almost has to be defined in terms of the natural. Because there has to be a metric by which something goes beyond natural to be beyond it.
I don't know, but I mean, in some ways, it sounds like natural is essentially like it's everything, pretty much everything that we can know.
I mean, are you aware of things that exist outside of the natural world that you can demonstrate?
I don't make the distinction between natural and supernatural.
Right, because it appears to be the case that only natural things exist.
What's that?
Right, because it only seems logical to it only would seem logical to say that natural things exist.
Right, and well, we might be equivocating, but I don't argue for something that I think is the supernatural.
You
I think
technically
it would
kind of
be.
do.
I think it would be better to say that if there exists anything that's supernatural, it would necessarily be beyond the capacity for us to discover it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think that the distinction is very useful in the first place, but if we are going to try to make it useful, then furthermore don't see a reason why we couldn't detect the supernatural if it does exist.
I mean, people have been trying forever to detect ghosts or whatever, and those are considered supernatural. So it's not like we don't try.
Because whatever you detect would be natural.
Exactly.
The fact
Well,
that you're
but
detecting it means
There have
that
been
it's
studies
natural.
on the effects of prayer, which is ostensibly a supernatural effect, and everybody, talks about the results of that, but nobody really
No,
talks about the
no,
fact that we actually
those
tried
don't
to
work.
test for the supernatural.
Prayer doesn't work.
Well, yeah, all of the results that were found exist in can be explained naturally, right? So the effects that they found, firstly, no one's ever demonstrated that that anonymous prayer works. There's absolutely no evidence for that.
Yeah, but
So the only thing that there's any evidence for is that if people know that they are being prayed for, they may sometimes, depending on the nature of it, get better, but that can be attributed to placebo effect.
right, but implicit in what you just said is the fact that we are testing for a supernatural effect.
Right. But what I'm saying is that if we found some other effect, that effect that we found would also be natural because we found it.
Well, okay, here's
Right, so it's relative. Supernatural is not an actual attribute of a thing. It's just the relative position of the thing.
okay, Brandon, would you agree to the following? Natural things can be quantized.
I guess in principle.
Would you also agree that supernatural things, by contrast, are things which transcend natural things?
I would say probably so, I guess. I mean, in the first place I don't accept the distinction, but if I was to entertain the idea, I guess I could go along with that.
Okay, why don't you accept that distinction between the two? And those are two fundamentally relatively simple assumptions regarding that, like regarding
I mean, I
nature
think
of objects.
we're lacking good definitions about two things. Natural, both the supernatural and the natural. I'm still not sure if we've really locked down a definition of natural.
I would say natural, at the end of the day, it's a phenomenon that can be quantized in some way or another. Supernatural is if supernatural is transcendent of that, it means that it cannot be measured. It means that it must be uncountable and infinite in its value, by definition.
Well, what do you mean by quantized? Because to me, we have continuous and discontinuous phenomena. So quantized would seem to be the discontinuous, but we can also
Quantized meaning like we can assign some metric of arbitrary value to it.
okay. So that's a little different from the way I would use that word, but okay.
How would you define it?
I mean that's fine. I think of it more as discontinuous, almost. Another word for discontinuous, but
I mean, even if something's discontinuous, you can measure the point where it becomes discontinuous, right? You can say that, oh, look, here's a point where it's continuous, and here's a point where it begins not to be continuous.
right. But you still have a range of continuity, though.
Right, so it still fits my definition in that it can be measured. Like, there's a sense in which we can measure.
Is different from, to me, measured is different from quantized, but I know what you're saying. I mean,
So I mean,
I'm just splitting hairs.
yeah, I mean, I'm still kind of wondering like why, you know, why someone would accept supernatural explanations, kind of like based on anything.
Well, but I guess that's kind of the point. Is you're assuming that I'm making an argument to the supernatural, and I don't think that I am.
Well, an intelligent design or supernatural, whatever you want to call it.
Well, it's not whatever you want to call it because you would dismiss something based on it being supernatural. It seems because it can't know anything about it essentially.
I would dismiss supernatural as being an explanation for something because you would never be able to demonstrate, unless you're teleported to that dimension and told by that being that it's the case, that it would be true.
So some being from another dimension reaches into the universe and, does something. I don't know, draws a smiley face in the sky. And you don't think that we would be able to observe the effect?
Now, see that could easily be explained by naturally by the clouds. I forget what the phenomenon is, but maybe CRISPR or immutable. No, there are times where where the clouds where we look like certain shapes. You know what I mean?
Regalia?
Yeah, I think that's it. Like I don't know if it has a different name for clouds, but I see that stuff happen, in cartoons and things. Well, while I was growing up, like there was always that scene of characters lying on the grass and and saying what the clouds looks to them. You know what I mean? I mean, you've had you've had people that that have seen the gates of heaven in the sky in the clouds. I'm like, oh, okay, you know.
Okay, but I think that's different from other kinds of effects. I mean, okay. In principle, if you observe an effect,
But how's that? But
you
here's the thing. How's that different though? Because you said if you observe a smiley face appearing in the sky, you're immediately gonna say, oh my God, God did it, or some being. Hell, you know what? Why don't we just say Q did it?
well, I
I'm
mean,
obsessed with Q. Sue me.
analyze an image statistically and determine if it's within the realm of possibility of what we would expect in a random system.
I mean, what would the expectation be for a supernatural being, if any at all?
I don't know. That's not my language.
What would your criteria be to say that, oh, this is an intelligent design or intelligently caused, or however you want to phrase it?
My criteria?
Yeah, I mean, how would you go about saying, here's this thing, it appears to be intelligently caused by virtue of this mechanism or by virtue of this thing?
Well, my criteria would be, is this an effect that is, to the best of our knowledge, unique to an intelligent cause?
Well, sure. I mean, but like we know that certain effects are unique to intelligent causes because intelligent beings do these things. We don't observe, transdimensional beings interfering with the universe and causing things to exist. Like I see somebody build a car because I see someone who knows how to build a car, and they build a car, and they're being intelligent about it.
Well, no, I guess I get I guess the counter argument to that. Well, you didn't really see the car being built, so you know what I mean. I'm just why the hell did I open my mouth?
I don't know. That's a very good question.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, but you can. You don't have to directly observe the designing intelligence in order to infer that intelligent cause played a role.
Right. So I mean, okay, even if I accept that, what tells you that the car is designed?
Because it has certain attributes that we only know come from an intelligent cause. To the best of our knowledge, we've never seen it come from any other kind of unconscious process.
So it takes the appearance of a design. So because of that,
Sure.
design,
Sorry,
and
say
it
that
seems
again?
to be kind of like what you're saying, effectively.
Well, I mean, you're using colloquial language, but I think it's standard reasoning. We attribute effects to their known causes.
Isn't that argument from consequence, though?
Flesh that out a little bit.
Okay, I observe two things. So I observe some phenomenon that has potential explanations X and Y. I don't see explanations. Well, okay. Actually, it goes. So I have some phenomenon that can be explained by two explanations, X and Y. I don't see criteria for Y, therefore X.
Hold on, I just want to make sure I understand. You said affirming the consequent?
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes called converse error, fallacy of the converse, or confusion of necessity and sufficiency. Well, of taking a true conditional statement and validly inferring its converse, even though the converse may not be true. Yeah, I'm still not sure I understand. Um, I'm not
You
really
understand what affirming the
familiar with
consequent is?
I'm not super familiar with that one.
So it's kind of like, suppose I observe a puddle. Puddles are generally caused by rain. Okay. Um, I don't see anything else. I don't see other things that could explain it from not being rain. So I assume that rain must have occurred to cause that puddle.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I think the crucial point here is that affirming the consequent ignores other candidate explanations. But I don't think it applies when there are no other candidate explanations or when you're inferring the best candidate or the candidate that's most parsimonious.
Well, you are inferring a second option in the case of like an intelligent design. You could assume that it's natural, but we don't know by what means that could have occurred by as of yet. And the part that seems to be being concluded is because we don't know a mechanism that could have brought this thing into existence, it must have been the supernatural. It must have been some kind of design that caused it. Maybe I'm misrepresenting it. Is CRISPR back?
Yeah, CRISPR, you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. You want to tag in or something? I don't know. You feel like me and Emil have been hogging the limelight here,
Sort of.
so to speak.
Actually, I just got some food, so I'm eating, but
Oh.
I'm listening. If I've got anything, I'll chime in.
All
Did it sound to you like he was affirming the consequence? Because that's kind of what it seemed like to me. I could be wrong on that one, though.
I don't know. From what I read, it seems like affirming the consequent is where you affirm a conclusion when there are other equivalent conclusions you might affirm.
Okay, so fundamentally, what affirming the consequence comes down to is it's the determination of a conclusion based upon the absence of evidence for some other proposition.
Isn't that an argument from ignorance?
No, an argument from ignorance is I don't know what it is, therefore it must be something. The difference between that and an argument from consequence is that there's at least one or more mechanisms that have been outlined, in this case intelligent design or evolutionary theory or some other theory, And the error being made here is saying, well, I don't see evidence for evolution or some other theory explaining biodiversity. Therefore, it must be an intelligent designer.
Yeah, actually, I don't think that is affirming the consequent. Affirming the consequent would be something like, if this thing is intelligently designed, then it will have these following properties. It does have these following properties, therefore it was intelligently designed.
How is
So that's affirming the consequent, and that's a logical fallacy, because you're basically saying if A then B, B therefore A, and that's the reverse of what logically follows. What logically follows is if A then B, A therefore B. So I mean that's affirming the consequent.
Digest that a little bit.
I'm not sure what logical fallacy I was trying to point out then.
But I mean, I think it's always the case that we attribute effects to their known causes.
Sure.
So when we observe a particular effect,
right,
we attribute it to its known cause.
Okay, so if there is no cause, so if there isn't a known cause, we just don't create a new one to establish it.
Yeah, but nobody's saying that.
It seems to me that that's kind of what the, I don't know, I mean,
there's the design proponents are saying, we know what causes this pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, I'm going to attribute this effect to that.
Actually, I would argue with that first premise that like we don't actually know what causes the specific pattern.
Right, but
we know what causes analogous patterns. But there's a failure there to apply an analogous pattern to a specific pattern. I don't think that logic follows.
I don't think it's not an analogy. What the design proponents will argue is that it's the same pattern by definition.
Yes, I know that's what they would argue, but they would be wrong in arguing it.
Right, and all that I'm saying, because frankly, you'd have to get into technical details, and I'd have to spend a lot of time on that. And there are other people who can argue from that point of view at uncommondissent.com, which I would actually love to see you guys go over there, but I'm sure you guys are busy. But there are people over there who can argue from the technical side a lot better than I can. But what I see is that the argument itself is either strawmanned or not really taken in a charitable. It's not really addressed in a charitable way, or interpreted in a very charitable way. So I guess what I'm trying to explain or argue for is that the argument itself, the way it's structured, is just fine. It's reasonable. It makes sense. There's really nothing wrong with the argument. It's just a question of whether you agree with the evidence or not. And you disagree with the premise that certain effects are by definition the same patterns or the same effects of things that we know are designed.
Yeah, so yeah. Point. So actually, yes, I think that's about right. I mean, so I would say that there are things that we know. You can name off things that we know happen through intelligent action, and then you see exactly that thing happen somewhere else. It's not like that thing; it's exactly the same thing. And in that instance, it's reasonable to then assume that in that case, as well as the known case, both have the same causation.
Okay.
But when you move it out to something that's just an analogous to a known cause, that logic doesn't follow anymore.
Yeah.
And I would say that when you look at things, when you start talking about molecular machinery, for instance, You can point to things in biology and say that they are, by way of analogy, like some human-made machine, but they're not actually that machine. They don't have identical properties, identical essential properties to those machines. They're just similar by way of analogy.
See, I really don't think that anybody argues from analogy. They would argue that it fits a certain definition. Now, when two things fit the same definition, it doesn't mean that they have to be identical. The definition doesn't.
That's why I clarified essential properties.
What's that?
That's why I clarified from properties to essential properties.
Oh, okay. Essential properties. Right. Okay. Because some people, they will dispute the design inference based on the fact that certain systems they're simply different from systems we know from direct observation are designed. And I don't think that's a refutation. The differences have nothing to do with the inference. It's the similarities from which we draw the inference. But that doesn't sound like you.
Yeah, and then
you
have
can be different but still fit the same definition.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, that would be like saying, you've only ever seen somebody stabbed to death with a small knife, and so you see somebody stabbed to death with a sword, and it's no longer the same thing. Well, the essential bits are the same. You had somebody killed by stabbing with a piece of man-made metal. That's everything that matters is the same.
Okay,
so yeah.
I think we actually it sounds like we sort of agree on the argument itself. It's just when we get down to the technical parts is where we it's like the argument is fine. It's just the evidence.
Yeah. So I think I've said to you before that I see essentially intelligent design as a subset of forensic science. It's just a subset that I think doesn't have any actual evidential backing.
Okay, so it's a fine argument. It's a good argument as well as any other argument. It's just it lacks evidence from your point of view.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, hey, wouldn't that be nice if it were true? It's one of those things where it's like I was saying earlier. If A, then B. Well, you haven't shown A yet. You don't have that bit of the argument that you really need.
I mean, that is really the crux of the argument at that point. It's, well, does DNA fit, the definitions of certain things that we know are designed, or, do molecular machines fit certain definitions of things we know are intelligently designed? Things like that. So, and that's where the real interesting arguments are taking place. It's more technical, but it's interesting because so many times, I mean, it's almost universal when I've discussed this. I've never before come to a place where we agree that the argument is okay. We always get stuck on the argument is crap. It doesn't make sense. It's incoherent. It's illogical, and all that stuff.
Well, I have to admit that the way that I usually see the argument, the way that I usually see it framed, it is pretty tenuous, I guess. I don't know. But I think that there are ways of stating the argument that sort of follows by way of not formal logic. It's it's a best guess type thing, but that's fine in science. It's not going to throw out a best guess. But even with that formulation, it's still lacking that evidential support. So I think that there's a dual failing here, which is that the ID proponents are failing both to accurately represent their view in a way that it's obvious to others and readily accessible, and then also to then actually back up the one bit of the argument that really matters.
Okay, so one is just a communication problem.
Yeah, which is, I mean, you say it's just a communication problem, but that is a huge failing. That is, you can't say that, oh, we've only just failed to communicate, because that's the only thing that really matters. Is if you fail to communicate, it doesn't matter what else you have to say. It's all nothing at that point. Like, if you can't convince somebody else, who cares?
Well, I see that differently. Personally, in my experience, it's been that the argument's been typically strawmanned or interpreted uncharitably.
Well, wait, but you say that it's been typically strawmanned or interpreted uncharitably, but wouldn't it be more? Isn't it also possible to say that the argument has been presented as the other person understands it, but they just don't understand it right? But then you have to ask, why don't they understand it correctly? And isn't that on you?
If somebody strawmans an argument and they describe it back, and they say that you've said something that you did not say, they've added something that wasn't there. So I don't think you can say that that came from the presenter.
Well, sometimes when you present something, like if I present an argument and the argument only makes sense if some obvious extra unstated thing is true, right? So it's obvious to the person listening that I'm adding that thing in, right? It's just anybody listening would figure out, oh, that's there too. And then somebody repeats it back to me. And when they say it back to me, they say that thing that I didn't bother to say. I think that's kind of what's going on with the ID thing, because when people hear it, it sounds like it's missing something, and I think it is missing something. And then people feel the need to fill in the bit that's missing with something that makes the argument make sense to them. And so they put something in to make it work as best as possible in their mind, and then you hear it said back to you with this extra thing put in that's the only way for the person saying it to you to get it to make sense to them. And now it's not right anymore to you because it's got this extra bit. But from their point of view, that extra bit is the thing that's making it all hold together.
I mean, I think it's kind of, it's probably not a very productive argument to attribute blame. I tend to think the imperative is to interpret arguments charitably. But, from what I can see, it seems to me that design proponents communicate very clearly. You have, I think Stephen Meyer communicates the logic of the argument very clearly, and many others, I think so as well. But, I mean, I don't want to go back and forth on attributing blame. I just think we all just need to be charitable. That's all. But the other point, though, is the evidentiary question, which I think is great because it's, frankly, never really thought we would get around to that point. I would be super interested to see you guys try to throw in a few comments over at Uncommon Dissent or even at the Facebook Intelligent Design group. There are some pretty prominent ID proponents in that group. Anne Gager, I think that's how you pronounce her name. She's active in the community and she'll respond to you and stuff. So and she has, some of these people have actual science degrees, including her included. So I think at that level, when we're talking about actual evidences, I would be really interested to see you guys engage some of those people who can engage at that level.
Yeah, but usually when I see these the evidence presented, it comes down to playing games with definitions. So it's like you're trying to come up with a way. It's almost always an equivocation. That I think is the most common result of this is that it ends up being an equivocation fallacy, where you're going to have, on the one hand, something defined in such a way that it is exclusive to design, to an intelligently designed artifact, and then you're going to have a second definition where it strips a couple properties from the first definition, to broaden it out a bit. And then with these properties removed, this new broader definition applies to other things in biology. And then they equivocate between the two to try and say that, well, see, now the only thing we know that causes this narrower definition is design, and here's this thing under this broader definition, so that must be design too. And I don't think that works.
I haven't really seen that.
Well, that's ATP synthase right there.
Maybe on Google Plus or things like that. Maybe I've seen that sometimes, but with the people I'm talking about, I've never, that I can think of, I haven't seen it. But I would be interested to see that. I would just maybe think about it and let me know if you decide to engage some of those people, because some of them actually have actual training, which I don't have time for. So I would really like to see that sometime. So just if you decide at some point, just let me know, because I'd like to see the argument engaged at that other level.
They have training in what now? I missed that.
There are some design proponents who have science degrees.
Oh, okay. I'm not.
Right. So I would be interested to see some of you guys go over to like uncommondescent.com or the
Reason
Facebook
to Believe
and engage them about some of the evidences.
I'm actually. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were. Go ahead.
No, it seems like we don't disagree a whole lot on the argument itself. It's just a question of the evidence. But the way the argument is structured and everything, it seems like we agree. It's okay. There's nothing like particularly wrong with it.
Well, part of the issue that I have is that people try to present it as a scientific argument, and it's not. That's my biggest gripe. Any one of us can postulate about anything, and be given enough leverage to, make as many presumptions about it, literally any conclusion. But when it comes to being a scientific hypothesis or trying to be put forth as some type of scientific endeavor, it's backwards. The conclusion is there, and now people are trying to, work backwards to the hypothesis in order to make it appear as though, or have all the earmarks of going through the same type of scientific rigor as any other, scientific.
Well, if there was an intelligent cause, and let's say it did tinker around with our DNA or whatever, how would, in a scientific way, how would you know? Or how would you be able to tell?
We would actually be able to find whatever the entity is, and then the mechanism through which it actually it did the tinkering.
So you would have to directly observe the entity before you can infer its existence.
Well, you would have to observe the machinations of whatever it is. And so if you saw something that was somehow altering base pairs through some unknown means that we have not discovered, then you could say, okay, now there is another cause that's doing this. It's not some, rogue polymerase that's going through and changing bases. There's something other than that, and we've exhausted all known mechanisms that could change base pairs.
So you wouldn't have to directly observe the entity?
No, not yet. Not at that stage. Just having an initial observation before you even concluded that some other entity even existed that could do that.
You need to directly observe it in order to infer its existence.
Oh no, not at that point. That you it would have to go through a series of steps because again, this is like one of the issues that I have is that there are leaps and jumps being made here about how people are supposed to infer things, and that when folks are saying that, well, this is miraculous, this thing happening in nature, it must have been supernatural, one, and then two, that there must have been some type of entity that has some unknown force that's able to interact with the corporeal world that could have actually done this. Though those are two separate statements and two separate scenarios. You have to actually demonstrate the machinations and then the creator or the user of said machinations.
Okay, so you can infer an entity without directly observing.
Not necessarily. That's the point that I'm trying to make. That's a presumption that because you see something happening, that there's an entity behind it.
Well, I mean, let's say you have some kind of prior knowledge about certain effects and certain kinds of causes, and you see certain effects that are attributable to certain kinds of causes, certain categories of causes.
Well, Brandon, could you turn yourself up a little bit? I can barely hear you.
Oh, sorry, I hit my volume. Well, let's say you have certain effects, and you can attribute those effects to certain kinds of causes.
Okay, sure. If I see a flame, right, that's because of combustion. I know that had the lumens or whatever that's being emitted from the light was from a combustion reaction. Sure.
Okay, so when you see a certain effect, you don't have to know everything about the specific cause, but you can understand that this effect probably came from a certain category of cause because that's how it is in your experience, in your uniform experience. This effect comes from a particular category of cause.
Right, because we
actually observe
Mhm.
the causal agent itself in order to understand that this effect is attributable to a certain category of cause. You don't have to actually observe it.
That's because there's a precedent set in our collective experiences that we've seen exactly how this came about, right? So when we are making these inferences, they aren't based on us never having seen this happening. So if I see a puddle on the ground and I've never seen rain, I'm not, is it my first instinct to think that someone came and dug that and then put the water in, or that rain fell from the sky? Now, mind you, if I've never seen rain in my life, well, which one is it? Which one do you think would be the more intuitive for a person to come up with? So,
well, I'm not saying there can't be alternative causes. I'm just saying within the scope of our explanatory resources, it makes sense to. Let me put it this way: it makes sense to attribute causes to effects within the scope of our currently available explanatory resources.
Right. And so if within our explanatory resources that we've only been able to see a mind and a creative mind really come from humans that are corporeal beings, why then are we stretching that to something that's, non-corporeal, since we've never actually experienced such a thing?
Well, I think because you can infer things that are not identical to things that you know.
Sure, but then you said it was within our scope of experiences.
Yeah, but you can infer, but that's only if you don't have reason to think that they're different. So you can simultaneously have reason to infer a certain attribute to a cause, and also reason to think that it is different in other ways to what we know.
But in a way that
exclusive.
But in a way that you've never actually observed before?
Yeah, sure.
What's an example of that?
I think we talked about this example before, but let's say you live in a cabin out in the woods. You have a dog. It's the only animal you've ever seen. When it runs out in the mud, it leaves footprints behind. And you can see where it was rolling around You can see where it was running. You can see where it was walking. You can see where it was digging. You can see all kinds of behaviors that it was doing. And you know these are the prints of your dog. Mind you, again, this is the only animal you've ever seen. Now, your dog is in for the night. You wake up in the morning and you look outside, and there are footprints out there. But they look different. They're much deeper in the mud. They don't have a paw shape. They have more of a hoof shape. They're much more spread out. So you can see that it looks very similar to the prints that your dog makes, but it doesn't look like it was your dog that did it. So you can infer a cause that has certain similar attributes. It looks like it's a quadruped, or what, if that's the right word. It's got 4 legs. You can see that it appears that it probably it can run, or it can trot. Hey, it even looks like it may have been digging over in one area. But you can also see that it must be different in certain ways. Like, it must be a lot bigger, must be a lot heavier. So this is a case where you have reason to attribute some familiar qualities to this unknown cause, but you also have reason to infer that it's also different from known causes,
Okay.
from the cause that informs.
But let me ask something though. Let's say you get out a microscope. You've never used a microscope before. You get out a microscope and you see in some surface some little pits. And you look at them briefly and you think that they're sort of similar to the tracks from your dog. Well, now does it make sense to assume that that it's made by some creature of the same general description as your dog? Because I don't think it does.
Well, can you refute that?
I don't think it's my responsibility to refute it.
Well, I don't think just leaving it in the air refutes my argument, though.
No, but the point is that when you give your example as you give it, it follows because it's within the same category. But when you apply that, the relevant application to biology is between these large man-made mechanisms and various bits of various enzymes and what have you. And there you have a different category. Just like the little pits on the surface are a very different category from these things that look like footprints. It's a category distinction.
Yeah, and that's why I say it's a bit disanalogous when we're talking about trying to draw a conclusion from something you have no precedence on. Like, because you've not seen another animal, you know that animals exist because you have that dog. You know that the animal must have a particular weight, even though the depression is deeper, but that's due to weight. You can draw reasonable inferences from the available evidence, but when you're talking about something that's non-corporeal, you literally have nothing to work with when it comes to what actually did that, because you can surmise that, well, an animal that has is a quadruped based on the spacing of the footprints. You can surmise its weight based on the depth of the depression. These are different types of techniques you can use, but cannot apply in the instance of something that's non-corporeal.
Well, non-corporeal. I'm not arguing that per se. I'm not really arguing that I would even know.
I mean, that's kind of my issue with trying to make this an analogous to never seeing a particular type of animal, because you can surmise that, well, yes, there are certain things that I've never seen, and I can be genuinely surprised by it. Perfect example, or the first time someone in the New World saw a giraffe. They didn't think that creature was real, but they knew that certain animals existed
Hey,
of all
Drax,
shapes
just
and
a second.
sizes.
Either keep your music off, keep yourself muted, or we're gonna have to force you out.
I don't know who's playing music. That's not me.
No, it's the new person.
I got it.
Yeah. So, that's one of my biggest issues when we talk about ID, because it's either been posited that, well, we already have solved all the issues, and that it's either the aliens from what was that movie, Covenant, or the
Prometheus.
creators, Prometheus. There we go. See, the Prometheus aliens, or it is some type of deity, both of which have yet to have been discovered, and then the deity, of course, being much harder to actually show exist than the Promethean aliens. But it comes down to, well, if it is in fact a deity, well, then now it's almost like we need a completely separate set of rules in which to gauge this supposedly scientific discovery.
Well, I mean, that's kind of a second order argument, though. I mean, it's like, okay, so we think that whatever did this must have had the attribute of being intelligent or conscious. So now, what kind of entity can we reasonably infer from there? That's not really germane, I don't think, to the actual argument of intelligent design, unless what you're arguing is that there can be no entity that
Well,
could
no,
exist that like what would be required.
well, no, I'm not excluding the possibility of either existing, but if you're trying to actually evaluate evidence, then you need a metric, as with any good experiment. Well, how are you going to measure this metric? What is the metric for intelligence that we're using? Because to me, it's a fairly nebulous concept to begin with. So if we have some standard tests to use to see, well, what is God level or deity
Now,
level intelligence versus super, anthropomorphic entity.
yeah,
Yeah, that was what I started with at the beginning of the stream.
yeah. A lot of people get caught up on that. I don't think it's intelligent in the same way as like an intelligence test. Charles Thaxton picked out that phrase intelligent design because he saw it in an engineering publication and he liked it, just for the engineering connotations. I think really what they're just referring to is the quality of being conscious.
Okay.
That's what it means. But specifically with the ability to produce certain effects or something.
So there would be some type of metric, though, to measure that by.
Well, uh, to measure what consciousness or
Sure.
well, I think that we can measure consciousness. I mean, we can evaluate. We can correlate certain brain patterns or whatever to certain levels of awareness.
Sure. So how do you do that with the deity?
Well, you can't directly measure it, but you can observe certain effects, and you can therefore infer that, well, it must be at a certain level of consciousness required to have forethought and planning in order to produce this effect.
So if you're actually trying to make this into a scientific endeavor, you can't simply say, well, I infer this every time you are starting to evaluate a piece of evidence. It has to stick by the same type of metric that you measure everything else by. That's one of the ways you reduce bias. And so, I mean, the reason I ask this because, again, when I'm presented with this argument, it does not actually want to be put inside of the category or the rigors of a scientific endeavor.
Uh, yeah, I don't really. I don't know. I think it's enough to have direct introspection. We know what self awareness is. We know what consciousness is. Oh, there goes my volume again. Sorry.
I mean, I'm not sure what if I were to say I'm going to measure the consciousness of
Sorry.
I was going to say if I'm trying to measure the consciousness, well, how am I going to do that just using the entities that I'm familiar with? I have 2 plates of E. coli right now in a fridge up the street. How would I go about measuring their level of sentience or consciousness versus any of the other things that I'm trying to measure? So for instance, if I'm using them as a control, right, in this experiment, how would I go about measuring them to use them as kind of a standard up against my other 2 possibilities?
Well, do they produce the effects known to be
Sure.
produced by entities that are known to be conscious?
Sure. They reproduce, they consume, they make waste.
Do they produce effects that are unique to
They're a group
entities
of
known to be conscious?
organisms.
What?
They produce effects that are unique to them as their own type of organism.
Sorry, maybe I can clarify that. So you can have the same organism, conscious and unconscious, 2 different states. So do they produce the effects of organisms or that are unique to organisms in the conscious state?
Sure. I mean, I'm pretty sure that they operate on much of the same level, even though they're unicellular. Uh, they do act in accordance with a lot of the social, I would say, more dynamic organisms that are out there that are multicellular. Now, albeit they can't communicate with each other in the same way, but they actually do communicate and defend themselves upon invasion, just like multicellular organisms would. So, I mean, there's a myriad of things that these tiny things can do, and what I'm trying to figure out is how exactly am I going to establish it didn't have to be them, but it could be like any type of control that we could use kind of as a standard to test what this intelligence or sentience even is.
I really don't know about the behaviors argument because I think we're able to simulate a lot of that with computers.
Sure. So okay, I mean, we could use a computer, to I guess simulate and create some type of metric. But if we're trying to measure these entities and one of them is non-corporeal, how do we go about doing that?
Well, non-corporeal. I mean, I'm not even really arguing that. I'm just saying that the quality of being conscious is associated with certain effects. I mean, I really don't see what the problem with that would be.
Because you're presuming that there's something that you're seeing an effect, and you're presuming that effect came from something that we've not directly observed. So you're trying to infer something, an effect of something that you've not actually previously had experience with.
Well, there's not inherently anything wrong with that. We infer causes that are unfamiliar all the time.
Well, sure, because I could literally postulate that the things that you're inferring are the machinations of an entity that does not exist in this or the next 29 realms, so that you would have to live another 500 years in order to experience it. That has just as much explanatory power as what we're being presented with.
You offered a particular description of an
Sure.
entity, and that means what?
It has just as much explanatory power as what's being put forth.
Well, I wouldn't say that you would have evidences for those additional attributes.
Well, I'm simply drawing an inference.
I don't think you are, because I don't think that you are able to attribute effects to those qualities that you added to the inference.
Well, you're saying that I'm adding qualities to it. Am I not simply drawing from what's available here?
No. You can attribute certain effects to a mind, to the activity of something that is conscious. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. You can't, based on that, you can't just infer any effects or qualities of an entity that you like without any connection to causal reality.
So you're saying I just can't
arbitrarily
just
attribute, other characteristics. You can't.
so
Right.
it would have to be something that we've experienced then that we know kind of exists in order to attribute it to it.
We would have to have some kind of prior knowledge about cause and effect.
So when is the last time you've had a cause and effect relationship between the metaphysical and the physical?
Well, I can understand that there are certain effects that require a consciousness to the best of our knowledge.
Sure, but what about metaphysical to physical interaction?
Well, if you're talking about supernatural and natural, I don't really accept that's much of a real distinction there.
Even though science operates on methodological naturalism?
Yeah, I really I haven't really heard any really good definitions of the supernatural in order to make a distinction.
What's not natural then, and is not
I'm
produced by
arguing
human
that
beings?
anything is not natural.
Well, if it's not produced by human beings or found in nature, then we could just label it supernatural, just to be broad as possible.
Okay, but yeah, so multiverse. Would you consider that a universe outside of our universe would be
Sure, for
supernatural?
arguendo.
What's that?
Sure, for arguendo, I can accept multiverse.
Okay, so you would accept that other universes other than our own would be supernatural.
Sure.
Oh, okay, well, sure, we can work with that language, but I don't think that it really is consequential, though.
I mean, that you brought it up. I just accepted it just to continue the conversation. But I
I'm
mean,
just saying that a lot of people will dismiss intelligent cause because they say it's supernatural, but you seem to be willing to entertain the fact that the supernatural may actually exist.
sure, I have no problem. Except, like I said, for arguendo, I have no problem accepting it. But when have we actually experienced the metaphysical act upon the physical?
See, yeah, I don't think that it almost seems like you're strawmanning the argument because I'm not making that distinction.
So the entity, one of the possible entities that you're positing, is actually a corporeal entity.
It could be. I mean, it could be. Maybe not. I wouldn't.
Okay, so
know.
are we excluding then the entity being non-corporeal?
I'm not excluding anything. I'm saying I don't know. All I know is that it's reasonable to attribute certain effects to a conscious activity.
Okay, so have you experienced a consciousness that is non-corporeal?
I don't really think so.
So okay, so do we have any type of evidence of a non-corporeal intelligence or mind?
I haven't really explored that. Argument. You might be able to infer it from if you trace the argument logically. It's possible. I wouldn't rule that out.
But do we have any type of like evidence? Anything? I mean, I would imagine wouldn't be tangible, but if the best that we have are simple postulations, could we or could we not rule out the possibility of a non-corporeal mind?
I've always maintained that we can't rule it out to best of my knowledge.
Well, if it's non-applicable, then I mean, I don't see where the problem is if it's not applicable for this scenario.
I'm not really sure I know what you're getting at. It could be physical in the way that we think of that, or it could be non-physical. I mean,
sure,
it doesn't matter. All that I think we could say is that whatever produced certain effects, it probably had the quality of being conscious.
Okay, and I have no problem accepting that. But if we have not seen evidence, or we have no evidence for a non-corporeal intelligence or mind, then why is that even a possibility? Why is it even in the running?
Well, because you can't rule it out.
Oh yeah, we can. We just said that we've not actually experienced such a thing. So why is it even on the ballot?
It's within the realm of possibility because you can't rule it out.
Can't rule it out even though we've not actually experienced such a thing.
Absolutely. We didn't experience X-rays. It didn't mean we could rule them out just because we didn't experience them until
Oh
we did.
well, we've experienced them, and we've experienced different types of
Now.
frequencies and radiations. We knew that it existed. We had actually had evidence of it, but trying to pinpoint something is a bit different than not actually knowing it's there prior to its
You can
official
have
announcement.
you can have multiple competing hypotheses, like for example, plate tectonics versus whatever the other theory was. And you can't rule out any of them.
Sure, unless you do
Yeah.
experimentation and you find that
So,
it's
in
one
other
and not the other.
words, they are both within the realm of possibility, even though you can't rule either one out.
Well, that's the interesting thing. We don't, every time we conduct experiments, we don't go back and say, well, this combustion reaction happened because of phlogiston. We've already ruled out that phlogiston isn't a thing. The same way with spontaneous generation. We don't have to go back and try and do that again because it's already been ruled out. No such thing exists. So if we have explored the depths of what it means to have sentience and have a mind, and have said, you know what, well, you do need this substrate, and this substrate needs to look like X, Y, and Z. Well, if there is no substrate to begin with, then it's kind of easy to rule out that possibility.
So you're saying that you can rule out a
non-corporeal consciousness, yes.
Non-corporeal consciousness. Oh, well, that's one argument. I mean, it
logically follows.
It's predicated on the argument that consciousness is an emergent physical quality from the brain.
It is.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so that's an argument.
Well, so there's actually a pretty fun test. You can actually test to see if someone's brain, their substrate, is damaged by having them hold one of their legs up, close their eyes, and touch their nose. Now, that's such a strange test, and there's a name for it, and I can't remember what it is right now, but it actually shows you whether or not they have soft tissue damage. Now think about something. If somebody has such an injury, but yet their mind is somehow associated with some other type of material that isn't attached to that substrate, isn't solely dependent on a substrate, why would such a test even work?
Well, I mean, I guess you're getting into another argument about about the nature of a designer. Does it have to be physical, or does it have to have a physical substrate?
Well, if it doesn't, then we wouldn't be able to affect it physically. Like, it would still do what it needs to do, regardless of whatever happens to the substrate.
Well, I think there are probably other arguments.
I'm willing to hear them, but if we're saying that the mind is not an emergent property of the brain, that the substrate really is just kind of there, then we should not be able to impact people's personalities and memories by interfering with the substrate.
Oh, well, I mean, I think everybody acknowledges that there's a relationship.
Sure. So has there been any tests to show that, well, you know what, we can impact memories without messing with the substrate?
Nothing I know of. I mean, you have some interesting quantum experiments where certain outcomes seem to be predicated on the observation of the test or the measurement problem. There's some interesting arguments there, I think.
Sure, and I look forward to the future and neuroscience, where we understand more about how these emergent properties actually impact who we are and what we do. But yet, if there is no actual evidence to show that there is some type of other substance out there that impacts who we are and impacts the substrate and works with it, then how do we conclude that there is something even to begin with without the evidence?
Well, I mean, in the first place, I've been on record for a few years as saying that if there is an intelligent cause out there that's non-human that created humans, I I believe that there is some kind of a substrate for that mind to operate on.
Mhm.
So I don't really think I mean, this is not something I've argued against, that we need some kind of a substrate.
But that the substrate works in, I guess, congruently with some other substance that the mind is made of.
I mean, it has to work somehow. So,
Sure. No, I completely agree with you. So if we're saying that, then there would have to be some type of evidence to show that. Would you agree?
some evidence to show what?
That the mind itself is not simply a emergent property of the brain, the substrate, that it is actually a conjunction of both the substrate and some other substance out there.
Sure. Yeah. That's
Okay.
I'm fine. I'm not making that argument. It's not really an argument that I make or that I see a need to make, really.
Okay.
But I think it is an interesting argument. It's an interesting topic.
Okay.
I think there are some interesting things out there about um, quantum mechanics and its interaction with mind, and I think it raises some interesting questions.
Sure.
Does
And
it
and
does it mean that mind can exist without some kind of substrate, or that the substrate is somewhere else, and our brains are more like cell phones, conveying signal? I don't don't know. I haven't investigated it enough. I just think it's really interesting, and I
and I
think
mean that's
the,
fair.
the thing is, I think that there are interesting unresolved questions that do, yeah, potentially at least open the door to other interpretations of consciousness.
Sure. And then those have to be explored. But until we actually have some tangible evidence for that, then how are we asserting that there is a mind that exists without that substrate?
Right, but I'm not saying that.
Wasn't that what you were positing earlier when we were discussing how this supposed other entity exists and that can interact with the physical realm, the corporeal realm?
No, I didn't ever argue that this mind is not doesn't have a substrate. I never argued that.
Oh, okay. So when I say non-corporeal, I'm specifically referring to something that does not have a substrate, just for clarification.
Oh, okay. Yeah, see, I wouldn't. See, I'm not sure I would make that same distinction, or I would equate those. But yeah, I can
So
see where the
okay,
confusion happened. Okay.
yeah. So I see what you. Okay, so are you saying that there is just another substance that exists out there that is corporeal, but it's not what we typically find, on our everyday walk of life?
I mean, I that is typically what I have argued or state. That's a position I've stated, that whatever this intelligence is, it has to be based on some kind of a substrate. There's some kind of substrate
Okay.
hosting the mind.
Okay. So it exists. It does exist corporeally on some level, just on the level that.
By
Or
your definition, yeah.
okay.
Now, am I as committed to that position as I used to be? I'm not really sure. I think there are a lot of physics questions that are raised there that I don't know enough about.
Yeah, and then that's fair, because my issue is that if we're asserting now that there is some other substance that exists out there that we've yet to encounter, that this our mind is made of, it seems like we're packing a lot of presumptions into this into this hypothesis
Well,
that
but
are really tenuous.
I remember, though, I'm just saying these are just speculations on my part.
Sure.
Even the fact that it relies on a substrate, that's a speculation, because that's only what makes sense to me. Don't really know a lot about the requisite fields like physics and things like that to make an informed uh, conclusion about those things. I don't even think we have enough information in the first place. But to me, it makes sense that there would be a substrate. But that's not part of my design argument, though.
So part of your design argument is it appears as though it's kind of based mostly on your personal credulity, what makes most sense to you, and not necessarily the evidence that we have as far as what we know in neurobiology and what have you.
Are you talking about mind, or are you talking about the design inference, like the nature of mind, or the design?
Actually, a bit of both. How you came to the conclusion to begin with, and the attributes of the mind itself.
Well, I mean, the arguments that I've seen, I think, are persuasive. What I have been doing in these chats is, let me preface this with, at a technical level, it would require a lot of energy, not a lot of time for me to engage at a technical level. And I think that it would be more productive for people like you and other people with technical training to engage some of these people at Uncommon Descent or at the Facebook Intelligent Design Group, where we have people that actually can engage at that technical level. But I haven't seen that very much at all. I would really like to see that. I think there are two dimensions here. There's the technical argument where we're getting down to, okay, well, what is the actual evidence? But then there is the other dimension where we're just trying to figure out the argument in the first place. Does it make sense? And so I think it's that second dimension where I'm able to have the most productive conversation, because I think a lot of the other arguments we've seen on Google Plus and Hangouts and everything, YouTube, whatever, it bounces back and forth erratically between these two dimensions, and you can never sort them out. So I've been trying to just sort out this one dimension that I think the argument does make sense. In principle, it's just fine as an argument. Now, if you want to get to the technical details and say, okay, the argument makes sense, but is the evidence there? Well, then I think it's more productive to talk to people with that kind of technical training on that.
Sure. And so for me, it's I have kind of like I said before, I have an issue with it seems like it's kind of the cart being drawn before the horse. You don't have the evidence for it, but things are just kind of being postulated, and that it takes on a lot of presumptions in order to do even that. But then when we speak to someone who may have a little bit of training, in which I'm not going to sit here and pretend like the most educated and well-versed person in this chat is CRISPR, and I lead on his understanding when I don't understand something. But it is, even at my level, talking to some of the folks who I guess claim to have some more training, their background doesn't really seem to fit with what's being discussed, and that when they are trying to make some of these arguments, it's not necessarily scientific. Many of them are more philosophical in nature, and then don't rely on any type of evidence or speciality that they have themselves. And so it's more like they're kind of leverage their previous accomplishments than
I would say, let's see what happens.
Sure. Now, I should preface that I'm not trying to besmirch them or their efforts or their intentions. I'm just only speaking from my experience, because I am actually speaking to Kylo Kenny, Dr. Kenny Rhodes from Reasons to Believe. He's working on an intelligent design-ish argument right now, and he and I have been in correspondence very recently, actually, over that. So yeah, I do see that there's a growing effort for people to do that. But
so you think he has real credentials?
Kenny Rhodes, I haven't actually looked into it myself. I just remembered, because you had mentioned the other group, that he was also trying to do something, and then he's with reason to believe.
Oh, okay. There was one time where oh, actually, give me 1 second. I have to plug in my laptop.
Oh wow, that was a bad typo.
I'm back. Let's see here. Yeah, okay. So there was actually one time when somebody from Uncommon Descent came over and was chatting with Sam the scientist.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was a long time ago, but didn't really last very long. It was like kind of a quick chat about a very narrow range of propositions.
Hmm.
I would like to see an actual conversation
Makes
though.
sense. Yeah.
Well,
We could
let me
probably
know
set
if
that
you
up.
do decide to go over there because I think it would be um, several levels, cosmic levels above what we've typically seen on YouTube and Google Plus and all of this nonsense.
Okay. I mean, is Immutable Destiny? Are you in that group?
No, I'm not.
You're not? Okay. If you come across, I'm playing WoW right now. I'm on another screen. Just go ahead and add me to the group, and I'll look through it. I have no problem going in there and
Yeah.
seeing what's up.
All
Yeah,
right.
JD came in there too.
Yeah, okay.
Christopher's too cool. He doesn't have a Facebook.
Oh, right. Well, you hear they're getting rid of Google Plus.
Yeah, I heard about that.
It's just been criminally neglected, though. It's just terrible. They could have done so much with it.
Well, it's
Yeah.
been criminally neglected by the user base, not by Google. Google's been paying a lot of attention to it for a very long time, and they're done putting their money into it.
I think they did it at the beginning for about 6 months. They put a lot of energy in it. Then that guy Vic, it was Vic something. He left. Some other company poached him, and ever since then, it's gone downhill. You still can't change the category of your posts. There's still terrible integration with YouTube. It's such a missed opportunity. I just think they neglected it. It's a shame.
Well, that's because you can't put music on it like MySpace. That's why.
Yeah. It had good integration with SoundCloud at one point. You could post a SoundCloud link and it would let you just kind of play it right there in the post.
Yeah, that didn't last too long.
Yeah. It's a shame. But anyways, I think this was a good discussion. Let me know if you guys decide to have that technical conversation over at those sites. I'm gonna type in the chat here.
Snanny for truth didn't get back to me. Oh well.
What a waste.
Yep.
Mind you, I don't always agree with everything at uncommondescent.com. They kind of sometimes they go into other topics other than intelligent design, or they go into topics that are loosely related to it, which are interesting, but not strictly intelligent design.
You don't endorse everything they say.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
But I think there are some pretty smart people over there.
Okay.
Thank
What
you.
do you know some of their backgrounds?
Offhand, I'm not sure, but I know like Behe has been over there before. And
Oh.
he actually is,
So I think
or
he's what, microscopy?
whatever. What?
I think his background is microscopy.
I'm not sure.
I'm trying to
But
remember.
it's a genuine science degree from a real
Yeah.
university.
Oh no, yeah. He has one. I was just trying to remember what it was. I want to say it was microscopy.
Right. Yeah, I can't remember. But anyways, yeah, go check it out sometime. Let me know though if you do, because I'd be interested to to
Okay.
watch from the sidelines.
There it is. I see the
Check
link.
out the Facebook group. It's not hard to find.
I'm actually pulling it up right now. I found a safe space. Aha!
All right. Well, I'm gonna get going, but I'll try to set this up again sometime. I do have another class starting in a week though, but
All right, you have fun with that.
we'll try to squeeze it in though. All right. I'll talk to you later.
See ya.
Bye.
Just resources.